It had been a great day for visiting. Orbie discovered his new friend Michael knew how to roll a ping-pong ball all the way down the banister. Katie learned that Michael was very good at puzzle racing. And they both discovered that sometimes it's really fun to play with a friend who's a bit older than you. Michael was already 6.5 years old. When he invited them over to play, they were very happy. Michael made them each a peanut butter sandwich for lunch and poured them a glass of milk, all by himself. Of course, his mom was there to make sure he managed. Katie couldn't wait to grow up and be as old as Michael. Orbie was sure that he could feel himself growing. At that very moment, Katie whispered to him that it took a little longer than that. It was when Orbie was standing on one hand, kicking his feet, that Katie noticed something about Michael. When he opened his mouth and laughed, Katie noticed that there was a hole in his mouth, a hole where a tooth should be. Katie asked Michael what had happened. Michael shot his tongue right up into the hole to show that it was really gone. Michael told her that his tooth had become loose and wiggly, and he wiggled it out in his spaghetti. Orbie laughed, but Katie gave Orbie a look and said, maybe it wasn't funny. Michael continued. His mom told him that it was a very exciting day. It was the day of the Tooth Fairy. Katie and Orbie looked at each other. The Tooth Fairy? They'd never heard of her. Michael explained that he had to hide his tooth underneath his pillow. Then the Tooth Fairy would take it and replace it with 2 quarters. Michael held his hands up to the sky and jumped. It was so much fun, Michael couldn't wait to lose another tooth. Katie was quiet for a moment, and then she asked if Michael wasn't a bit nervous about losing all his teeth. What would he chew with? Michael looked at Katie and Orbie. He told the two friends that all Katie's teeth were going to fall out, too. And Katie grabbed her mouth to hold them in, and Michael, he laughed out loud. But he told her that it was okay, it was supposed to happen. And when you get to be 6 and 7, your baby teeth will fall right out, and your big teeth will grow right in. Orbie was so glad that Katie didn't have to worry that he snorkeled and did a cartwheel. And Katie giggled. At supper time, they asked Mom and Dad about the Tooth Fairy. Katie was a bit afraid of the Tooth Fairy coming into her bedroom. Dad told Katie that the Tooth Fairy was as tiny as a butterfly, and she wouldn't even wake Katie up. All she would do is leave a little present and take the tooth away. Katie decided that something that tiny in her bedroom at night wouldn't be scary. Dad told her that it would be a very special night, because on that night she'd know she really and truly was growing up. Katie clapped her hands. She couldn't wait for the Tooth Fairy. Orbie was quiet when he got up from the table and walked over to Dad's chair. He asked if Dad knew anything about little aliens. Dad looked at Orbie and he tickled his chin. We'll have to wait and see, he said. After supper, Orbie thought about the Tooth Fairy a lot. And finally, he asked Dad to write a note for him. Dad was glad to do it, and Orbie handed him the pad and pencil. He asked Dad to tell the Tooth Fairy that he didn't have any teeth to lose, and if she wanted to trade anything else, Orbie would really like her to come and visit. Dad finished up the note and gave it to Orbie. When Orbie went to bed, he placed the note right under him on the floor. The next morning, Orbie was up with the sun. He looked down at his note, and for a moment, he thought the fairy had not answered. Then he looked more carefully. In the corner, there was some tiny writing. Orbie couldn't help it. He tooted, and Katie sat up in bed. He asked her to come with him to find out what the fairy had said. Mom and Dad were still asleep, but Orbie snorkeled very gently, and soon Dad opened an eye and saw them. The minute Dad's eye was open, Orbie told him about the note. Dad sat up in bed and read it. Because it was in teeny, tiny writing, Dad borrowed Mom's reading glasses, and it looked a little silly. As he read, Katie and Orbie could barely believe their ear. It said, "Dear Orbie, I don't write notes very often because I'm so busy collecting teeth. But when I saw your note, I thought I'd better answer you back. There aren't a lot of little pink aliens on Earth, you know." Orbie sure did know that. She said, "I usually only collect teeth, but you have something very special that I would like to collect too. I would love it if you would draw me a big dot, the same color as your spots, every time Katie loses a tooth. See, I'm very tiny, and I will use the dots to decorate my house. Don't make them too big. Sleep tight. Yours truly, the Tooth Fairy." Nobody spoke for a minute. And then Orbie bugled his excitement. Mama, who was snoozing a bit, shot right up out of bed. Then she burst out laughing. Katie and Orbie danced around the room. Then Orbie asked if Katie could feel anything loose and wiggly in her mouth. Katie checked and told him she couldn't. They'd have to wait until she was a little older. They both cheered and jumped up and down. It was a long time before Katie finally did have a loose tooth fall out. But when it did, the Tooth Fairy came and collected one tooth and one polka dot and left Katie and Orbie 2 quarters each. And I know that when you're old enough and your tooth gets wiggly, the Tooth Fairy will visit you too. And on that very day, you'll know you're growing up for sure.